"Do they know it's me?" she asked, her voice calm. "No," Emeka replied. "But it's only a matter of time. You've been too close to some of their dealings. They'll put the pieces together." Amina's instincts told her that the time had come. She could no longer remain in the shadows. She had to go public. The pressure was building, and every moment that passed without action was a moment that the Lua family's grip on the village and beyond remained intact. Amina couldn't afford to let that happen. She knew that this would be dangerous, that it would put her in harm's way, but it was the only way to ensure that their reign of terror would come to an end. It wasn't just about exposing them anymore. It was about destroying their empire. Amina had learnt that one of the most powerful tools the Lua family had was their ability to control the narrative. The public believed in their power, and that belief kept them untouchable. But what if Amina could shatter that belief? What if she could show the world the truth of who they really were? The following day, Amina met with Emeka at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the village. They were joined by a small group of trusted individuals. Yara, who had become Amina's closest ally, and a few others who had agreed to help her expose the Lua family. Together, they made a plan. They would leak the information slowly, carefully, starting with the most shocking pieces, the stories of exploitation from former employees. But Amina knew they couldn't do it alone. They would need the help of the media. They needed someone who could reach the masses, someone with enough influence to take their story and broadcast it to the world. Emeka made a call to a journalist named Nia, a respected investigative reporter who had been following the Lua family for years. Nia was known for her no-nonsense approach and her ability to bring down corrupt empires. After a brief meeting, Nia agreed to help Amina and her team, but she warned them that it would be dangerous. The Lua family had connections everywhere. Amina felt the weight of those words. She knew that exposing the Luva family wouldn't just be a personal fight. It would be a battle for the future of the village, for the countless others who had suffered in silence, and for every person who had ever been oppressed by the power of the few. They would need to be careful, methodical, and prepared for whatever retaliation the Lua family might throw at them. But the fight had begun. The storm was gathering, and Amina was ready to face whatever came next. Amina knew that the next step in her plan would be the most dangerous. With the help of Emeka, Yara, and the small group they had assembled, they began to release their findings to the media. Nia, the journalist, had agreed to publish the first expose, a detailed report covering the Lua family's illegal land deals, fraudulent business practices, and decades of manipulation. But they couldn't afford to be careless. Amina knew that once the information hit the press, there would be no turning back. The Lua family would retaliate and they would come after her. As the days passed, Amina's anxiety grew. The pressure was mounting, but she refused to back down. She spent hours combing through the documents they had gathered, making sure everything was airtight. Any flaw could mean the collapse of their entire plan. With every new piece of evidence they released, the reaction from the public grew stronger. What had once been whispered rumours now began to take notice. The day the first article was published, Amina could feel the world shift. It wasn't just another news story, it was a bombshell. The headline read, "Lua Family's Hidden Empire, Corruption, Exploitation, and Fraud Uncovered." It was detailed and damning, and it sent shockwaves through the community. The public outcry was immediate. People who had never questioned the Lua family's wealth and influence now began to see the cracks. Protests erupted outside the Lua estate, with villagers demanding accountability and justice. But the Lua brothers were not going down without a fight. Within hours of the article's release, their lawyers were already working to discredit the claims, threatening legal action against the media outlets and reporters involved. They had too much to lose, and they weren't going to let some upstart tear down their empire so easily. Amina knew they had only scratched the surface. She had anticipated the backlash, but she wasn't prepared for how quickly the Lua family would strike back. Late that night, she received a message from Emeka. The contents of the message made her blood run cold. The Lua family had sent hitmen to silence their sources, and one of their key allies, Yara, had gone missing. The cold reality hit Amina like a hammer. They weren't just fighting an influential family anymore. They were fighting a well-organized, dangerous criminal network. This was no longer just about exposing corruption. It was about survival. The disappearance of Yara sent Amina into a frenzy. Yara had been her closest ally, and now she was gone. Amina had to act fast, but she also knew she couldn't do it alone. The fight had escalated, and it was clear that the Lua family wasn't just going to roll over. They were willing to do anything to protect their wealth and power. Amina reached out to Nia, hoping she could use her media contacts to dig deeper and find any trace of Yara. Nia was hesitant at first, but when she heard what had happened, her resolve hardened. She had seen firsthand how powerful people like the Lua family could manipulate the system and silence anyone who stood in their way. But Nia also knew that the public needed to see the truth. They needed to know that people like the Lua brothers could no longer get away with murder, both literal and figurative. With the full weight of the situation now on her shoulders, Amina knew she had to go underground. Her family was at risk, and if the Lua family could silence their allies, they would stop at nothing to silence her too. She retreated into the shadows, moving to a safe location while continuing to work in secret. She could no longer trust anyone with her identity. The threat was real, and it was growing by the day. But the movement was growing too. Even as Amina hid, the public outcry was impossible to ignore. Social media was ablaze with posts calling for justice. Activists, journalists, and ordinary people alike were rallying behind Amina's cause. Despite the Lua family's wealth and influence, they couldn't stop the truth from spreading. In a desperate move, the Lua brothers turned to their last line of defense: powerful politicians with deep ties to the government. They tried to bury the story with fake news, paid experts who claimed that the allegations were baseless, and even death threats against the journalists involved. But Amina knew it wouldn't be enough. She had the evidence. And now, the people were starting to demand action. The breaking point had come. With the public on her side, Amina knew it was time for the final push. But how to go about it? Amina's resolve was stronger than ever. She had seen the darkness of the Lua family's empire, and now she would bring it all crashing down. But she knew that to defeat them, she had to strike hard and fast. The clock was ticking, and every moment she waited, the risk of being silenced grew. In the dead of night, Amina made a decision. She would leak the final, most incriminating pieces of evidence that would destroy the Lua family's influence once and for all. This wasn't just about their corruption. It was about sending a message to the world. No one is above the law. Amina's heart pounded as the moment of truth approached. Her final move would not only reveal the full extent of the Lua family's crimes, but it would also expose the corrupt system that had allowed them to reign unchecked for so long. She had made up her mind. There could be no returning back. With Yara still missing and the stakes higher than ever, Amina knew this was her last chance to bring the Lua family to justice. The media had been flooded with details of the Lua family's wrongdoings, their illegal land grabs, fraudulent business schemes, and manipulation of both local politicians and law enforcement officials. But Amina had something more devastating in her possession: a secret ledger, a list of names and transactions detailing bribes, illegal kickbacks, and hidden offshore accounts. These were the kind of secrets that could unravel the entire network. With this final piece of evidence, Amina could bring everything crashing down. Late one evening, Amina met with Nia. Their faces were grim, knowing full well that this move could cost them everything. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Nia asked quietly. Amina met her gaze and nodded. "It's the only way to make them answer for everything," she replied. With their plan set in motion, Nia would release the final bombshell, a detailed expose of the Lua family's financial dealings, with the secret ledger attached as proof. This was it. The truth was now out of their hands. "Once the article goes live, there will be no turning back," Amina said. her voice tinged with both determination and fear. As the article hit the presses the following morning, Amina sat quietly, watching the flood of responses. The global outcry was immediate. News outlets picked up the story, and the truth spread like wildfire. Whistleblowers within the Lua family's businesses came forward, corroborating the details of the ledger. In a matter of hours, social media was ablaze. Hashtags like Justice for Amina and Lua family corruption trended worldwide. The public outrage reached a fever pitch, and for the first time, the powerful Lua family was on the defensive. The government was forced to act. Investigations were launched, and international authorities were brought in to trace the illegal funds. The ripple effect was immediate. Politicians, once loyal to the Lua family, started to distance themselves. Business partners withdrew from deals, fearing the scandal would tarnish their own reputations. The family's carefully built empire began to crumble. The people who had long been silenced by fear were now speaking out, sharing their own stories of manipulation and abuse. But despite the growing storm, the Lua family didn't fold easily. The brothers, particularly Juma and Baraka, were notorious for their ruthlessness. They were used to getting what they wanted, and they weren't about to let some expose bring them down. The Lua brothers issued a public statement denouncing the allegations as baseless and accusing Amina of slander. But the tide had already turned. As the evidence mounted, they found themselves increasingly isolated. The media dug deeper, uncovering even more of their illicit activities. Investigative journalists uncovered additional layers of corruption. How they had bribed judges, how they had used their wealth to silence witnesses, and how they had manipulated the legal system to avoid paying taxes. The public outrage reached a boiling point when it was revealed that the Lua family had been involved in the disappearance of multiple activists, including Yara. The truth of Yara's disappearance became public. Amina's worst fear had been realised. Yara had been murdered, likely as part of the Lua family's effort to stop the investigation. But this revelation only fueled the fire. Amina's resolve hardened. Her determination to see the Lua family brought to justice was unwavering. In the days that followed, protests erupted outside government buildings, demanding that the Lua brothers be arrested. Global human rights organisations rallied behind Amina, calling for an international investigation into the Lua family's corrupt empire. The brothers had underestimated the power of the people's anger. But it was not just the legal system that was working against the Lua family. The pressure from the international community, the local population, and media outlets had become too great. After months of legal battles and mounting evidence, the Lua brothers were arrested. The once untouchable family now stood trial for corruption, murder, fraud, and conspiracy. The trial was a spectacle. In the courtroom, the Lua family tried to deny the charges, but the evidence was overwhelming. Amina's brave stance had forced the wheels of justice into motion. And it was not just Amina's victory. It was a victory for every person who had been exploited and silenced for so long. As the verdict was read, Amina sat in the back of the courtroom, her eyes focused on the family that had once ruled with an iron fist. Guilty. The Lua brothers were sentenced to life in prison. Their empire, built on lies and corruption, was no more. Amina's heart swelled with pride. She had achieved the impossible. She had brought the mighty Lua family to their knees. The aftermath of the trial was just as dramatic. The Lua family's assets were seized, their businesses dissolved, and their name forever tarnished. They had been brought down not just by their crimes, but by the strength and resolve of a young woman who refused to stay silent. The aftermath, and Amina's legacy. Years later, Amina looked back on the battle with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The Lua family's fall had changed her life, but it had also changed her country. The system of corruption that allowed such powerful families to thrive had been shaken to its core, but there was still work to be done. Amina continued to work with NGOs and international organisations, fighting for systemic reform and helping other survivors of corruption and violence to find their voice. She had used her story not just to heal, but to inspire. And while the scars of the past would always be with her, she had finally found peace. Her victory over the Lua family was not just personal revenge, but a battle for the soul of a society that had been broken by greed and power. She had broken the cycle, and in doing so, had become a beacon of hope for those who still struggled under the weight of injustice. As she stood at the front of a rally years after the trial, speaking to a crowd of hundreds, Amina's words echoed the message she had always believed: no one is above the law.